Her wrinkled hands trembled as she reached for the heavy glass door of the luxury dealership. The spotless showroom glowed with polished steel, chrome rims, and cars so flawless they looked as though they had never touched a road. The building itself was intimidating, bright white marble floors that reflected the fluorescent lights, a vast glass wall revealing rows of gleaming cars lined up outside, and an artificial scent of leather pumped into the air, as if to remind every visitor that this place was for the elite. Eleanor stood there in her faded blue cardigan, her hair tucked into a scarf, her shoes worn at the edges. To anyone else, she might have looked like a woman who had wandered in by mistake. But inside her chest, her heart beat with quiet dignity. She had come with a purpose. For weeks she had thought about this moment, replaying it in her mind. She wasn't here for herself. She wasn't even here for her husband. She was here for Matthew, her grandson, her pride and joy, the first in the family to graduate college. She and her husband, George, had promised him something special. Matthew had worked his way through sleepless nights, part-time jobs, and endless exams, never once complaining. He had walked across the graduation stage just weeks ago, his eyes full of hope and gratitude. Eleanor remembered the look on his face as he hugged her tightly after the ceremony, whispering, "I did it for you and Grandpa." That moment had branded itself into her heart. So when she decided to surprise him with a car, she had known it wouldn't be easy. Money was never abundant in her life, but she and George had been careful, disciplined. They had something set aside, and if it meant tightening their belts again, so be it. Love was worth more than comfort. But as soon as Eleanor stepped into the dealership, the air around her changed. The sound of her sensible shoes tapping across the marble floor seemed out as in the echoing showroom. Behind a sleek white counter, 3 salesmen sat in pressed suits, their ties perfectly knotted, their watches gleaming under the lights. They looked up at her, and their expressions, fleeting but sharp, said everything. A quick glance from one to the other, a slight curl of a lip, the kind of look people share when they believe they're superior. Eleanor swallowed hard, forcing her shoulders back. She told herself she was imagining it. She approached slowly, her eyes scanning the glittering cars. Sleek sedans, powerful SUVs, and sports cars that looked like they belonged in magazines. She knew she couldn't afford the fanciest ones, but maybe something reliable sat among them. Something she could be proud to gift her grandson. "Excuse me," she began softly, her voice polite but firm. "I was wondering if you could show me a few of your vehicles." One of the men, tall, with slicked back hair and a smirk that seemed permanently etched into his face, stood up. At first glance, his smile looked professional, but the way his eyes traveled down her cardigan, her scarf, and finally to her old leather purse made Eleanor's stomach twist. He took his time answering, adjusting his cufflinks as though even speaking to her required effort. "Of course, ma'am," he said, his tone artificially slow. "But these cars," he gestured around with a lazy wave of his hand, "are quite high-end. I just want to make sure you're aware before we waste too much time." The word waste landed like a stone. Eleanor blinked, unsure if she had heard correctly. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came. He leaned closer, his voice dropping low enough for only her to hear, though his colleagues behind the desk chuckled as if they knew exactly what he was saying. "These vehicles might not be in your range," he said, his eyes flicking toward her purse again. "Perhaps there's a used lot down the road that would be a better fit." The heat rushed to her cheeks. For a second, Eleanor felt herself shrink, her body curling in on itself as though to disappear. But then her grandson's face flashed in her mind. Matthew's wide smile, his proud eyes, and she straightened again. "I just want to look," she managed, her voice trembling. The salesman exhaled sharply through his nose, almost a laugh, then gestured toward the corner of the showroom where the most basic sedan stood. He didn't bother to accompany her, didn't bother to explain features or options. His attention already returned to his colleagues, who leaned together, whispering and snickering. The sound burned in Eleanor's ears. She walked slowly toward the car, her hands brushing against its polished surface. It was beautiful, yes, but in that moment she couldn't even see it. All she felt was the weight of humiliation pressing down on her chest. She tried to focus, tried to imagine Matthew's joy, but the salesman's laughter rang louder, drowning her hope. Her vision blurred. She blinked rapidly, forcing back tears, unwilling to let them see her cry. She had lived through so much, raising children with pennies in her pocket, sitting beside George during long nights of illness, burying friends and family with dignity. Yet here she was, at 70, 4 years old, being treated like a nuisance, a joke, as though her worth could be measured by her cardigan and her purse. Eleanor turned back toward the door, her steps unsteady. The men didn't even stop her. One of them called after her in a falsely cheerful tone, "Have a wonderful day, ma'am," followed by another round of laughter. She didn't look back. She couldn't. The glass door felt heavier this time as she pushed it open. The bright sunlight outside was almost blinding, but she welcomed it, because at least it hid her tears. She walked slowly across the lot, her body trembling, her pride cracked wide open. She had only wanted to give her grandson a gift of love, and instead, she had been stripped of dignity. By the time she reached the bus stop at the corner, her legs ached, but the ache inside her chest was far greater. She sat down on the bench, clutching her purse as though it were her last anchor. For the first time in years, Eleanor felt small, invisible, and utterly defeated. That evening, when she returned home, George noticed the silence in her eyes long before she said a word.